So as my presentation is coming up, I might, I think I might begin by explaining my voice. So just to add more of an international flavour, I'm originally from Ireland, and I think given the challenge facing them, I think we might thank the wonderful translators and transcription team who are trying to figure out my accent right now. I hope it goes okay, but thank you so much. And this is my first time in Indonesia, and I would just say a lot of us were discussing over breakfast what we'd like to get out of today, and as the first speaker, I would love to hear more from you about what you think is needed to make change. Because having come here once, I would usually come back. I think the plan for all of us is to come back and to find a way to be useful. And again, respectfully knowing our lack of knowledge, because the amount of notes all of us took yesterday, we learned so much yesterday. I learned that there are 24 million people potentially with disability in Indonesia, which is 6 Irelands. 6 Irelands of potential. You know, and I like to think that I'm proud of my country and we have an impact. What if we could unlock that scale of change, the potential that's there? Now, just to begin on my presentation, I was really impressed by, I was impressed by all the papers, but there were 2 that were very close to my heart and to my paper yesterday, which were the 2 papers on budgeting. And when you're starting out and starting conversations about disability, money and resources always make an entrance. And coming here from Australia, I want to underline that making economic arguments about disability in favour of inclusion, that is absolutely essential, that it can be a key lever for change. And people should not be defensive about the idea that part of economic growth is inclusion. And what we are experiencing, and obviously I've experienced it in Ireland, I've experienced it in Australia. What's the picture that's up on the slide? That's the leading newspaper in Australia in 2014. And it's calling people with disability a burden and positioning them as a drain on economic growth. And I know many of you will have encountered this. It's the number one advocacy challenge is the resources issue. And what I want to do is to tell the story of how some wonderful advocates who I hope will join us in Indonesia, and this is about who would you like to speak to from Australia? Please tell us, you know, all of you have equivalents in Australia. I mean, Piers and myself, you know, like, you're so familiar, the projects you're doing, there are so many, it matches what everyone else is doing. So there's so much learning that can be done. And this poster is still brought up regularly by people with a disability. It's remembered. It's the thing that has to change. And Graham Innes, who's a leading lawyer with disability and vision impairment, former Human Rights Commissioner, a leading figure in disability advocacy in Australia, he wrote a very strong response piece to this headline. And he underlined that we have to stop positioning people with a disability as objects of charity. And we have to approach things from the point of view of they are not, we're here to support them to achieve what they can achieve. And that's the fundamental change that has to occur. And if we could just turn to the next slide. The reaction to that emphasis, there was this emphasis that people with disability, they are taking a lot of health services, they're taking a lot of welfare. As a response to that emphasis, Australia's disability advocates founded the Every Australian Counts campaign, and they successfully used economic arguments to create the National Disability Insurance Scheme. And the word insurance is important because what it recognises is any of our lives could change in an instant. Disability is not a tragedy, it's not a fate, it can happen to any of us at any time. And it's about solidarity and generating solidarity. And what's interesting about this National Disability Insurance Scheme is it's a rights-oriented idea. It's about human rights, it's about inclusion. But they sold it by getting economic data, by crunching numbers. And just to show you some of what they did. So obviously Indonesia does not have 22 billion necessarily. I'm not saying that. But what it underlines is the force of economic arguments. That if you can show government that a little bit of investment in people with disability will lead to fantastic outcomes. And yesterday, when the university was talking about its growing inclusion of students with disability, I was so happy to see the employment outcomes. Because this isn't about adding in vulnerable people, this isn't about charity, it's about common sense, the potential in people. And when you get into the data, when you collect it, the business case is stunning. So with Australia, it's going to spend $22 billion. But the data says if 10% of the people in the scheme go to work, and if 10% of their carers, the people currently caring for them, if they go back to work, the scheme pays for itself. So the scheme, as you can see in bold, the scheme is modeled to produce 1.1% economic growth for the entire nation, 1.1% GDP, and of all the new jobs in Australia in the next decade, 1 in 5 are going to be delivering services to people with a disability. And that's a message to take to any of your students who are looking, just like, we're all getting older. That's one of the great things about economic growth, that populations start getting older, there's more of a need in the care and health services. And this really underlines it, that out of all the new jobs in Australia, so many of them are going to need disability. And what was interesting, and I hope you're picking up in the way I'm talking about people with disabilities, is when they were met by that burden language, you're a burden, it's going to cost, the answer was no. We have tremendous capacity. We want to work, we want to get educated, and we'll drive the country forward. And the politics of the NDIS were so successful that the primary argument now in Australian politics is who's going to do the best job on the scheme? Who's going to run it the best? So it's yes, there are problems, and we're going to get to those, but that frame, don't back off the economic argument. And I would encourage you to think about, for example, in this university, always track outcomes and give the business case, because it's there. It's there. It's not the case that human rights don't pay off. They absolutely do. Okay? And what's really interesting, just to give you some examples, because that's the very big picture, huge numbers. Probably numbers that just can't be replicated in Indonesia. It'll have to be smaller scale, as I say, start in the university, run smaller scale projects that show investment logic, that show the payoff really visibly and gain momentum. Here's some examples of investment logic in action. Okay, so this is 4 cases that show the scheme giving people rights that they wouldn't have had up to now. Okay, so there was a case 6 months ago where a person asked for 6 pairs of glasses to let them drive. And previously, they had been receiving, or they have been giving bus passes and train passes and relying on public transport and relying on their parents to drive them. And when the tribunal, or the appeal body, when they looked at the case, they said, we have to fund these glasses because look at the payoff. These 6 pairs of glasses allow the person to drive, it releases the carer to go back to work. And the public transport system, when you look hard and when you look with a broad eye, it saves money to spend money. Another example, fantastic story, this one, where there was a person with disability. He was initially denied funding for a hearing aid, and the medical system gave him a hearing aid on loan. And while he was appealing for funding from the government, he got a job for the first time in a decade with the hearing aid he had as a loan. And that got up before a tribunal, and the tribunal said, of course we're funding the hearing aid, because it was literally $8,000 for a hearing aid, but $250,000 in a decade in tax that the person would pay. It's momentum. I mean, another example in the health system, and I think Pierce will probably draw on this from his experience with psychosocial disability, health is ripe for this type of approach, where if you spend out in the community, you prevent people going into hospital. You prevent the crisis. And again, know the cost of crisis, and know the cost of giving someone a little support in the everyday that prevents them collapsing and having to go into an institution. And all of this can be modelled and it can be done. And the last story I would share from the last year is an incredible one. It's a bit of an image that to me underlines the benefit of investment logic. It's a family called the Parash family in Sydney. And Peter, the son, he was trying to get, like we all got to university today, Peter was trying to get to his education, and the family had a problem. He was wheelchair bound, and they needed funding to get to the train station. And currently they were driving his electronic motorised wheelchair. They were putting it into the back of a ute, a trailer, into the open air, and it could potentially rain on the wheelchair and destroy the wheelchair. And what they did again, they went to the tribunal and they said to the tribunal, this makes no sense as an investment. I have a wheelchair, it's under danger, please can I get to the train station? Just can I have it's so little money. And he goes into education, he'll move forward. So again, those are really grounded. I know that 22 billion, okay. But those things, if we can drive those things and everything you do is tracking that outcome, all of a sudden what was a negative, it costs your burden, becomes a tremendous positive, and you get momentum. So just moving to the next slide. Patrick had Canadians yesterday, I have Swedes. So from Sweden, Gunnar Myrdal, who was a developmental economist, he has a tremendous quote that I think embodies what I think is an important principle, which is, very often we talk about economics in isolation. So disability has nothing to do with economics. In fact, we do economics, Indonesia has to grow its economy, and then we'll talk about disability. Because disability is the extra afterwards. But what Gunnar Myrdal comments is, everything is an economic problem. And what is economic reflects other things. And that's what the NDIS was drawing on, that we should not segment and say, some areas of life are about economic growth and others aren't. Caring can be the most efficient option. Being inclusive is the most efficient option when we get the data. Now, I wanted to talk about another feature of investment logic. What is powering it forward? It's not governments, necessarily. Now, government is giving money. But the starting point for investment is people naming their goals, pointing out what they need, being clear that there is a path they want to pursue. Naming that is powerful. And when you approach government and you say, I want to study law at this university, you have a concrete demand, you're there, and you're asking for a bit of support that's obviously going to yield an outcome. And that power has tremendous impact. When we talk about inclusion, there's a danger it slips back into charity. Here you are. Congratulations, you have been included. Congratulations. You receive some inclusion. What the NDIS and what Australia is slowly, very slowly learning is that true inclusion is actually reflecting on ourselves and the assumptions we make about people. And the image, sorry, if you could go forward, I was going to get to this. This image is one that I always use. This image, some of you might have seen these, they're actually all around the world, in major cities around the world. And they go viral on Twitter and social media. And everyone gets very excited and say, wow, look at this inclusion. Look at how the image is of a conventional stairs, and they've built a ramp up the steps of the stairs. And what's great about this? Well, to the superficial eye, initially when you see it, you're like, look, the ramp isn't on the side. People with disability are central, okay? I don't like this image. This image has the wrong approach. This image is what a person who doesn't have disability like myself, what they might do if they don't listen. Because even though it's a fantastic image, if we can move forward, it doesn't work. It does not work. Because the slope is too high. You can't take a wheelchair down it. The colour is not correct if someone has a low visual impairment. And there's no railings. So it's interesting to me as a person without disability, but with members of my family who have disability, I'm sure there's always a lot of us get into that because of that. With someone with no lived experience, I think the way that image keeps popping up and people keep thinking of it as a fantastic measure of inclusion, it shows how far we have to go. It really does. And it shows the benefit of lived experience. I haven't walked down that stairs. And even now when I'm doing the presentation, I've chosen an image to communicate. And I've disabled people in the room who have a vision impairment. Because we always need to be thinking about, once you see it, you don't forget it. And you have to keep thinking, why did I do it this way? What's the most effective way? And you're learning all the time, even as an academic. Now, if you just move the next slide, sorry. I do want to make, we'll make the presentations available. Like, I don't necessarily, it's not a time to, I want to leave you with some broad thoughts rather than lots of detail and lecture at you, okay? But there is the idea of looking at people with disability, not from a top-down, but look at their lives and where they're going to. Don't just look at how do we make health services better. Don't segment their lives according to what departments you have. Start with the person and say, what are the things we need to give to get them to outcome? And that's the whole of life course approach. The other thing I would say is driving here, in on a toll road, seeing the building, seeing the economic growth. I'm not coming here to lecture at Indonesian people at all. Because when I see Australia, so much of what Australia is doing is recovering from its history. I wish, whether it's Ireland or Australia, I wish we could go back in time to the moment of building. And when you drive around Indonesia, you see so much happening. So many new airports, new train stations. That story of people trying to get transport connections in Australia, one of the reasons it's so hard is the train station is built. It may not yet be built in Indonesia. That's where the potential is. That if you mainstream the disability, you won't have to do as much. So I think there's huge, I don't want to come over and say Australia has all the answers. But there's one thing that Indonesia can do is say, well, Australia made that didn't go well for Australia. No, we're going to be a little bit clever, and we're going to put ramps straight from the off, and we're not going to have to fix up old train stations. So there's an awful lot to learn. Now just the last, if you could just skip to the very last slide. You never cover all the slides. So the last message, the A word, I talk about inclusion, advocacy. I'm a lawyer. I'm not very good in some situations. And I just wanted us, if we have a chance today, I'd really like us to talk about messaging around disability. Because the most important people are the people who aren't in this room, who aren't engaged. And what I would say is, when you get this presentation, click into the links, because we can research what is an effective message, what will make change at a local government level, at a national government level, in the public. And the results are surprising. It's pretty scary for me as a lawyer, but research indicates that I am a terrible advocate. Because I try and point out factual errors, I try to criticize government, and I talk about things in terms of rights. I've learned, and I think Patrick in particular, I know would have experience with this, what I've learned is storytelling is so important. So I've spoken to you about getting economic data. Communicating it is so essential, and we have to have a conversation about that. And the thing that struck me about so many of the presentations yesterday was how proud you all are. I mean, the term nation building was used. How do you catch that pride in a country? Like, a campaign for the NDIS is called Every Australian Counts, which is an emotional message. And it's emotion that makes the difference. And meeting people like Slama, meeting all of you, personal stories are the key engines for advocacy. So don't think, when you're doing research, when you're criticizing, you also need to be strategic and tell the story of the person. And that's what actually makes a difference for politicians. That's what will stay with them. And we saw that yesterday with the lady and the bag. That's what everyone remembers from yesterday. So we need to have that chat about messaging as well. Thanks very much.